But next week we have to talk about Pesach already, Mr. Shem. So I'm going to talk about the Rebbetzin. I have 3 classes. I have seminary Beis tomorrow, and then I have seminary Aleph on Thursday. I'll talk about the Rebbetzin a little bit. Anytime you talk about the Rebbetzin, you face the same issue. I didn't know the Rebbetzin. It's the funniest thing in the world. I talk about a person whom I never knew. So why do we do it? I need your attention, please. So why do we do it? We do it because the Rebbe wants us to do it. The Rebbetzin, b'chayeha hagashmim, during her physical life, was extremely involved in the work of Lubavitch, of the Rebbe. But she was behind the scenes. And she told somebody who told me, I had a conversation with a very important lady last week, and she told me that the Rebbetzin told her, Ich darf es nicht. I don't need any honor, I don't need anybody to notice me. This lady, whose name I'm not going to say, told me that Rebbetzin was one of those people that she would have been by herself all day and all night. She would not have been lonely, and she would not have been bored. She didn't need people the way we need people. She was very, very self-sufficient. And when you met her, this lady told me you felt her power. The Rebbetzin was extremely powerful. Her personality, and she saw her role as the granddaughter of the Rebbe Rashab, the daughter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe. And her role in this world was to help people. People used to call her 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. She'd pick up the phone on the first ring. She never was half asleep. And she would help you. The only time she wouldn't help you was if the Rebbe had gone to lay down. The Rebbe would lay down like 5 o'clock in the morning. And she really did not want to bother the Rebbe when the Rebbe would lay down. And sometimes even then, if she felt that was urgent enough, she would go into the Rebbe. But she didn't want a couple of hours. The Rebbe slept so little. The couple of hours that the Rebbe slept, the Rebbe. Otherwise, if you called in the middle of the night, she would go into the Rebbe, and she was so careful to give over your message correctly, and then to repeat to you the Rebbe's words precisely. She told somebody that my husband's words have to be repeated exactly. Can't change it. The Rebbetzin was such a chassid of the Rebbe, you have no idea. But when the Rebbetzin passed away, the Rebbe started a huge campaign of Achei Temimim, the living should take to heart. And the Rebbe wrote notes that indicated that the Rebbe wanted we should have her picture. The Rebbe wanted we should name our children after her. The Rebbe wanted we should learn from her life so that it would make us better people. That's how the Rebbe felt. So this is why we talk about this Rebbetzin, whom we never knew. If I would see the Rebbetzin, I told this to you probably Beis Rivka, if I would see the Rebbetzin on the street, I wouldn't recognize her. I don't even remember if I talked about the Rebbetzin Beis Rivka. I don't think I did. I don't think I got around to it. If I would see the Rebbetzin, I would have no idea who she was. Not a clue. None. I would not recognize her at all. I grew up in Crown Heights, but I never saw her, as was the case for most Chassidim. The Rebbetzin was born away from Lubavitch. She was born in a rest area not far from Lubavitch. And the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote to his father, the Rebbe Rashab, who was in Lubavitch, that a second girl was born. And the Rebbe Rashab wrote letters back with Mazel Tov. And one of the things, I need to have your attention, please. And one of the things that the Rebbe Rashab wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe is that if you haven't given her a name yet, you should name her after the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab chose her name. He writes to the Frierdiker Rebbe, if you haven't given her a name yet, you should name her Chaya Mushka, or Chaya Musi, as people call her. She grew up in Lubavitch, the Rebbetzin did. She grew up in Lubavitch. I'll tell you a Lashon Hara Maise. If it's Lashon Hara, I wouldn't say it. You understand yourselves, right? I have a little self-respect, but I call it Lashon Hara Maise because it's a story that is. What's the value of the story? They lived in Lubavitch. There were 3 girls. The oldest was Chana, the middle one was Musi, and the youngest one was Shendel. They called her Shena, but they called her Shendel. And there's no question about it, because you see in all the letters, they called her Shendel. It was a city full of boys. Lubavitch was Bachrim. Hundreds of Bachrim. So it makes sense that the Rebbetzins parents, the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, the Chamadina, did not want the girls to raise a gas. They wanted them to stay home. But they liked to go out. Anyway, one day the parents were not home. You must understand, Lubavitch today is a shtetl. There's not a paved road in Lubavitch. There's no such thing as asphalt. There's no such thing as tar. It's mud. So in the summer, when the sun is shining, the mud is dry. So you can walk. But in the winter time, from the time of the first rains through the last snows and the melt of the snows, the streets are mud, mamish mud. But not a centimeter of mud, 4 or 5 inches of mud. You know, you walk into, you go out. Every time you put your boot into the ground, you have to pull it up. You have to pull it out of the mud. So they used to put on planks of wood. And the planks of wood sort of floated on the mud. And that was the sidewalk. But the plank of wood wasn't 4 feet wide. It was 8 inches wide or whatever it was. So the Rebbetzin told this to somebody who told this to me. That my parents were not home, and we decided I'm again a racing gas. We're going out to the street. So she and her older sister, Chana, got all dressed up. They put on nice clothes. They put on their goats. And they walked out into the streets of Lubavitch. It's hard to visualize what it was because they lived in the chutzner. But whatever, they walked out of the house. The minute they walked out of the house, a goat shows up, and the goat is following them. And they were intimidated by this goat, and the goat is chasing them, and they're trying to get away from the goat. They ended up both falling off to the plank of wood and falling into the mud, and they got verchazet. So they would joke later, the tata geschickt nach uns Zieg. It goes much better when you understand Yiddish. That their father, who told them not to leave the house, sent a goat to kick him back into the house. The tata geschickt nach uns Zieg. The tata, my father, the Rebbe, Ayas, the Frierdiker Rebbe, sent the goat to make sure that we do what he asked. She grew up in Lubavitch. And remember that everything I'm telling you I heard from other people, because I never met her. And I try to understand. And what you find is that different people give you different versions of that Rebbetzin, and sometimes they're a little bit contradictory. Sometimes they're a little bit contradictory. But the Rebbetzin was a woman who loved Lubavitch. She loved the whole energy of Lubavitch, the whole energy of Chassidus, the Fabrengen, the Bochrim, the passion, the Avodah. The life of Chassidus was very near and dear to her. Rabbi Shmuel Lu from England says that the greatest Mesiras Nefesh of the Rebbetzin was not to allow herself to enjoy this. The Rebbetzin could have come to Shul and she could have been at the Fabrengen. She could have been by davening. She could have participated in all the energy that was Chabad. And whatever the reasons were, whatever the cheshbonis were, and there's a lot of people to different cheshbonis, the Rebbetzin made the decision that the best way she could serve the Rebbe, which is what she did for the last 38 years of her life, not like before she didn't serve him, but once the Rebbe became a Rebbe, that became her full-time job, to make the Rebbe's job as easy as possible. The best way she could do it was to stay away. And for her it was a Mesiras Nefesh because she had a geschmack in it. She enjoyed Chassidus, she enjoyed the Negunim, she enjoyed the Fabrengen, she enjoyed the Torah, she enjoyed the Avodah. And she didn't really get to see it. The story that they tell, and I never met them, but this is the story that they tell. I actually heard from somebody who saw this with his own eyes. That in Tavshin Lamed Ches, when the Rebbe was a Rebbe for 28 years, the Rebbe had a heart attack, Le'aleinu, and the Rebbe recovered from that heart attack mamish miraculously. And the Rebbe went home. The Rebbe went home Rosh Chodesh. The Rebbetzin was upstairs in the previous Rebbe's apartment, directly above the door. Could you visualize the front door of 770? Yeah? Thank you for responding. Above the door there's windows, and the Rebbetzin was sitting in those windows, and she was watching the dancing and the singing. And she was so heartened. It meant so much to her to see how much the Chassidim loved the Rebbe, her husband, the man. because she didn't really participate in that. She was in the background. She didn't allow herself to be a part of what was going on in 770. That's how it was. So she grew up in Lubavitch. She was around the Temimim. When people who knew her later in life would discuss Lubavitch with her, she would describe Lubavitch and the Bacharim who learned in the yeshiva in Lubavitch almost as if they were her brothers. You could feel how much she felt a part of what Achei Temimim was, what the Rebbe Rashab created, what the Frierdiker Rebbe continued. It was very, very important to her. Now, of course, the story of her life is that she lived in Lubavitch till she was about 15. But she was born in 1901 in Tafresh Samach Aleph. The Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch in Tafresh Ayin Vov, the end of 1915. So if you think about it, she was not even 15 years old. She was 14 and a half when they left Lubavitch. And they traveled from place to place. They were looking for a place to live. It was in the middle of a war. And they finally settled in Rostov, which was a city in the south of Russia. And she lived in Rostov as long as the Rebbe Rashab lived in Rostov. Then the Rebbe Rashab passed away. The Frierdiker Rebbe became the Rebbe. She lived with the Rebbe. Then the Frierdiker Rebbe moved to Leningrad. And she, of course, moved with her parents to Leningrad. And when the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia, she left Russia together with the Frierdiker Rebbe. But we know little things about her. Not a lot. You know, very little things about her. There's a volume of Igros Kodesh. There's a volume of letters from the Frierdiker Rebbe to her and the Rebbe, where you get little insights, little windows into the relationship she had with her father. And you get to feel a little bit for who she was. A little bit for who she was. Amongst the things that we know were that the Frierdiker Rebbe had incredible trust in her. The Frierdiker Rebbe trusted the Rebbe in Chayamushka incredibly. During the years of the Soviets, when the Frierdiker Rebbe's life was mamish on the edge of a knife, the Frierdiker Rebbe's whole life was Mesiras Nefesh. He was arrested a bunch of times. He was called into many interrogations. And at some point it was decided by the Russian government, by the Soviet government, that the Frierdiker Rebbe is not allowed to manage his own finances. I don't know the particulars, it doesn't matter why, but the fact was the Frierdiker Rebbe was not allowed to take care of his own money. So the Frierdiker Rebbe needed to appoint somebody else to oversee his finances. His mother was still alive, his wife was still alive. He had a son-in-law, he had a married daughter. Who did the Frierdiker Rebbe entrust with his finances? The Rebbe Achei Mushka. She was all 22 or 23 years old. The Frierdiker Rebbe had incredible trust in the Rebbe. The trust consisted, it's really incredible, that the Frierdiker, all the people the Frierdiker Rebbe chose. He could have chosen, there were plenty of Chassidim around who were very important and very great and very powerful and very smart. He chose the Rebbe because he trusted her. And he trusted her to do what she needed to do to look after his interests. And more than anything else, he trusted her that she wouldn't say anything you shouldn't say. You know, she had that kind of sense that in that very, very difficult world, you didn't speak an extra word. You know, what you didn't need to say, you didn't say. It was that simple. The Frierdiker Rebbe had this incredible trust in the Rebbe's Chaim Mushka. Now, you don't see it explicitly, but you see it implicitly. But the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe basically made the Rebbe in Chaim Mushka, gave her the power of attorney, Koyach HaShoshi represented him in those very difficult times, shows you how the Frierdiker Rebbe saw her. The Frierdiker Rebbe, in those very dark years, was dedicated to the support of Torah, period. It wasn't Lubavitch. Anybody in Russia who was doing anything for Yiddishkeit, the Frierdiker Rebbe supported it. In Leningrad, where the Frierdiker Rebbe lived, there was a Navardik yeshiva. Navardik is what we would call today a Misnagdish yeshiva. It was not a Chassidish yeshiva. It was a real yeshiva which was very into Musar, beautiful Jews. And in Russia, if you were from, you were a tzaddik. Not a tzaddik. You were higher than a tzaddik, you understand? And they had no food. They had no food. And the Frierdiker Rebbe used to push it, send them food that the Bacham should be able to learn. But you had to carry the food from one side of Leningrad to the other side of Leningrad. So if you would send a man with a beard, it'd be very conspicuous. So who would deliver the food to the Nevada yeshiva every single day? The Rebbetzin, she'd take the food, I don't know how she carried it, she'd get on a bus, she went all the way across town, and she would deliver the food. It's a small story, and it's hard for us today to understand how responsible that was and how dangerous that was. And that's the kind of relationship that Friedrich had with the Rebbe Achei Temimim. He just trusted her so implicitly. And there's two other things. When the Friedrich Rebbe was arrested, and he went to jail, and he mamish with nisim geluyim, with great miracles came out of jail. When the Friedrich Rebbe was living in the Soviet Union, the more I learned, the more I believe this. The Friedrich Rebbe did not have an exit strategy. The Friedrich Rebbe was not planning to survive. I think the reason the Friedrich Rebbe made Yud Beis Tammuz in such a big Yom Tov, because the only one who saved the Friedrich Rebbe was the Eibishter, because the Friedrich Rebbe did nothing to save himself. The Friedrich Rebbe's Mesiras Nefesh in the Soviet Union was completely reckless. He was throwing his life away. He said in a Fabrengen of Purim, Tafresh Bezayin, that if you see, he pointed at his body, you see this body burning, don't stop teaching children Torah. The Friedrich Rebbe said, as is at dem Guf Bread, sollte nicht aufhören lernen Torah mit der Bar. The Friedrich Rebbe's Mesiras Nefesh in the Soviet Union was reckless, without any cheshbonos for himself. And the Eibishter saved his life. And to him it was a sign of Mila that he had broken something through, and that made the Yom Tov Yud Beis Tammuz. And he went to Kostroma. You all know this, right? When he was released from prison, he went to Kostroma. It was officially supposed to be for 3 years of exile. The whole exile lasted 9 days. From Gimel Tammuz till Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Gimel Tammuz he left and came home. And then 4 or 5 months later he left Russia. When the Friedrich Rebbe went to Kostroma, he took along 3 people, 2 men and a woman. The 2 men were a chassid by the name of Machon and a chassid by the name of Achei Maltes. And the woman was the Rebbe Achei Mushka. Rebbe Achei Mushka, he took along the Rebbe. And it didn't take the Rebbe along because she should cook him breakfast. He took the Rebbe along because he trusted her, he needed her. And the Rebbe throughout her life would tell the story of Beli Pirsum. You've never heard the story. And it's a small little story, but it's not a small story at all. When the Friedrich Rebbe was released from prison on a Sunday, Gimel Tammuz. And he went home to his house for a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours. Then he went on a train, and he traveled to Kostroma, which is very, very far away from Leningrad. And the requirement was that every Tuesday, which was the beginning of the work week in Russia, he needed to report that he hadn't left the city. Once a week, he had to go into the offices and let them know that he was there. So he left Leningrad Sunday evening. He arrived on Tuesday, which was Achei Tammuz, and he went into the offices of the KGB or whoever it was that was in charge of prisoners, and he said, I'm here. The next Tuesday, he was supposed to go in again. The day before was Monday, which is Beis Tammuz. And the Rebbe was walking in the street, and a man walked up to the Friedrich Rebbe, who worked at the KGB, and says, I want you to know, the offices are closed today, you can't go in, but you should just know that a cable came from Moscow that you're free to go home. You can't leave because you have to report tomorrow morning officially. And when you report tomorrow morning officially, they'll let you go home. But you should know now that you're free. That's why there's a 2-day Yom Tov, Yud Beis Tammuz, and Yud Gimel Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz, he was told unofficially that he's free, and Yud Gimel Tammuz, officially that he's free. When the Rebbe was told that he's free, he told the Rebbe Achei Mushka to call Leningrad on the phone. You're talking 98 years ago. A phone call 98 years ago was a little bit more expensive and a little bit more complicated than a phone call today. They already had electricity, they already had wires, but you're talking 1920s. The Rebbe called up, and the message was, I'm not telling you all the words, but approximately there was, Wir werden sein in der Heim of Shabbos, Beli Pirsum. We will be home for Shabbos, Beli Pirsum, don't tell anybody. And throughout her life, the Rebbetzin would repeat the words, Beli Pirsum. Many people know it here from the Beli Pirsum. But the Friedrich Rebbe told her to call the house, and there was no phone where he was staying. She had to go to some office and order a phone call, and to call the house, and to let them know, we will be home for Shabbat, Beli Pirsum. And throughout her life, she would quote those words, Beli Pirsum, Ona Pirsum, without don't announce it. This was one time that the Friedrich Rebbe took the Rebbetzin with him. And the other time was that summer. When the Friedrich Rebbe was released from prison in 1927, he made a really disturbing discovery. He discovered something very, very upsetting. Because the Frierdiker Rebbe was defying the Soviets. He was daring them to hurt him. He was doing things, his Mesiras Nefesh was with zero regard for himself. But there was one major problem. The major problem was that as long as the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Russia, everybody corresponded with the Frierdiker Rebbe. All of the askanas, all of the public work of maintaining chadorim and yeshivas, and all the other things that the Frierdiker was involved with came through Frierdiker Rebbe. So all the KGB had to do was to sit outside the Frierdiker Rebbe's house and see who comes and goes. Anybody who came into the house, left the house, was automatically a bad guy, and they would arrest him sooner or later. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from prison, he realized that what the Russians did, what the Yevsektia did, what the KGB did was, the Frierdiker Rebbe they couldn't touch because there was too much noise from America, too much noise from Western Europe, but anybody who came near him was arrested. In other words, he was the only free person, the whole rest of Russia was a prison. The Rebbe realized quite quickly that his staying in Russia was the worst thing for the continuation of the work, because anybody who was in contact with the Frierdiker Rebbe would go to jail. And in order for them to continue doing the work, they had to become decentralized. You know, in other words, instead of being an organization led from one place, every little group, in one shtetl a Yidden are doing work, another shtetl a Yidden doing work, and the third shtetl a Yidden doing work, and they're not allowed to know about each other. I know a Yidden who remember the Soviet Union and Russia, who always tell me that the rule was information that you didn't absolutely need, you didn't want. When Chassidim would get together for a meeting, everybody ran away. They didn't want to know. Because the KGB arrests you and they beat you up. You can't confess to something you never heard. If you didn't need information, you didn't want it. And the Rebbe realized that as long as he stays in Russia and everybody comes to him, they can't touch him, but they can touch all the people around him. So very shortly, I don't know how long, a week or two, after he came back to Leningrad, when he was released from prison and released from his exile, he disappeared from Leningrad. He went away. He went to Moscow. And he stayed in a suburb of Moscow called Malachovka, in a house, apparently. There was also a shul there. I don't know exactly the arrangement, but he was there for that whole summer. And during that summer, the Frierdiker Rebbe did not want anybody to come and see him. He wanted to be left alone. And it was a very painful summer for the Frierdiker Rebbe, because the Frierdiker Rebbe was making the fateful decision to leave Russia. He did not make that decision lightly. It took him months to make the decision. The Rebbe agonized. The Rebbe did not want to leave Russia. He did not want to leave Chassidim behind. And as he himself would say, I'm not leaving Russia because I'm afraid. I'm leaving Russia because this is my next step. Simchas Torah Tafresh Peches, the Frierdiker Rebbe made a public announcement that if anybody thinks that I'm leaving Russia because I'm afraid or because they're threatening me, they're making a big mistake, and he used the expression, Seder Mesuder Yeshka, there's a plan, there's a grand plan. I am leaving Russia because I need to do something else, and this is the next step on my journey. But he spent that entire summer making the decision to leave Russia. Who did he take with him to Moscow? His middle daughter, the Rebbe Chaim Mushke, she was with him. And I'm sure they talked. I'm not saying that Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, needed to talk things over with her. But she was his confidant. She was the person he trusted. And the end of the story was that later in that summer of 1927, the Frierdiker Rebbe made the decision to go to his father's oyel, which was very dangerous. He was in Moscow. His father is buried in Rostov. It's hundreds of miles, maybe thousands of miles. It's far away. And he wanted to go to his father's oyel on the birthday of Achei Temimim. The birthday of Achei Temimim is Yud Gimel Elul. So he traveled with the Rebbetzin. And when he traveled, he made it very clear that nobody should come see him. Now, Chassidim were desperate to see the Rebbe. Desperate, for two reasons. Number one, they wanted to see the Rebbe. And number two, they wanted to do something for the Rebbe. So one of the people, there's a story. A Yid by the name of Shmuel Zalmanov got a message from another Chassid that the Frierdiker Rebbe is traveling from Moscow to Rostov, and he's going to stop in Kursk, which is the city where he lived, and this date, and this time. So he had a yeshiva. Shmuel Zalman had some bachrim with him. He told the bachrim to wait outside the train. He got on the train with a jug of Chol of Yisrael milk, which was a very, very precious commodity. And he went from car to car until he came to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe was sitting with the Rebbetzin in a bench. And he gave the Frierdiker Rebbe the milk. And the Frierdiker Rebbe really was ignoring him. And he sat on a different bench, and he realized after a while that the Frierdiker Rebbe is really not happy that he came on the train. And at some point, the Rebbe asked him, how do you know I'm here? So he said that I got a telegram. So the Rebbe says to him, you shouldn't be so smart and send the next telegram. In other words, tell Sidim to stay away. It was pekuach nefashos mamash. The Frierdiker Rebbe went to his father's oil in Rostov, and he got, as he would say it later, he got his father's permission to leave Russia. Once he made the decision to leave Russia, he went back to Leningrad, and Tishrei Peches, no holds barred. That Tishrei, the last Tishrei Rebbe in Russia, once the Frierdiker Rebbe knew he was leaving, he said, okay, everybody come, let's chaparai, that's the last opportunity. And hundreds, probably thousands of Chassidim came. For many of them, for most of them, it was the last time they'd ever see the Frierdiker Rebbe. And for many of them, it was the only time. Before they never saw the Rebbe and afterwards. That Tishrei Peches was Shturmdik. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, okay, let's do it. Let's do it right. And the day after Simchas Teda, the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia with his mishpacha, with his mother, with his wife, with his 3 daughters, which included the Rebbe Achei Temimim, and his son-in-law and his grandson. And they went to Riga, Latvia, where the Frierdiker Rebbe would live for about 4 years, or 5 years, or 6 years. The Frierdiker Rebbe, as soon as he became a Latvian citizen, moved to Poland. As soon as he became a Latvian citizen, moved to Poland. He wanted to be near the yeshiva. But becoming a Latvian citizen saved his life. When the Second World War started, he had other citizenship besides for Russia. He was a Latvian citizen, and the Germans wouldn't touch him because the Germans and the Latvians were at peace. And that's how the Frierdiker Rebbe was smuggled from Poland into Latvia through Berlin, through Germany. And the Rebbe was with him. It took the Rebbetzin a year to get married, and they left Russia right after Simchas Teda Tafresh Beches, which is 1927. The Rebbetzin got married 14 months later. They got married in Kislev Tafresh Beches. 14 months later, 1928. And there's all kinds of reasons why the wedding was delayed. It was delayed. I mean, one of the reasons it was delayed is there was no money to make a wedding. Another reason it was delayed was they were hoping that the Rebbe's parents, Rebbe Leivik and the Rebbe Tzanchana, would be given permission to leave Russia for the wedding, but the Soviets would not allow it. So once it was clear that there's no way the Rebbe's parents are going to make it to the wedding, they made the wedding without the Rebbe's parents. A man told me, a Yidit Mitzelt, that he wanted to get to know the Rebbetzin. He wanted to know the Rebbetzin. So he made a phone call. He called up the house and wanted to meet the Rebbetzin. And whatever, the Rebbetzin hesitated 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and finally he made his way into the Rebbetzin, and he had a meeting with the Rebbetzin. And he had a second meeting with the Rebbetzin, a third meeting. One time he was making a chasana. So he called up the Rebbetzin that he's here with his mishpacha, and he came to the Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin made a place for everybody. Any person that you would come to the house, she paid a lot of attention to each individual person. They were sitting around the table. I don't know how many people it was, 8 people, 10 people, 12 people. And she made a space for everybody at the table. They came and they sat and she served and she farbrenged with people. Amongst the people sitting at the table was this man's father. I heard the story. I heard the story from Label Zions, okay? I'll tell you his name, Label Zions. His father gave to Simcha Zissel's Zions. His father was at the Rebbe's Chasana. His father was at the Rebbe's Chasana, at the Rebbe and the Rebbe's Chasana. See, he describes to me, they come to the house, and they're sitting at the table, and the Rebbe talks to each person. The Rebbe talks to each person separately. She gives a lot of attention to each one. I'm going to tell you a stupid story, but it's not stupid at all. I just heard it from my sister. It's worth repeating. My sister met the Rebbe when she was a Kala. They went, my mother's Agizunta, my sister, and my sister's mother-in-law was an Ilmemis. They went to see the Rebbe Chaim Mushka in the house. And the Rebbe prepared food for everybody. My sister was exactly what she served. And the Rebbe said to my sister was 19 years old, she was a young girl, said to my sister, would you like tea? So she said to the Rebbe, I don't drink tea. And she says, in hindsight, how stupid was I? She offered me tea, I should have taken the tea, but you don't think about it at the time. So the Rebbe said, you'd like coffee? So she said to the Rebbe, I don't really drink coffee. And then she said to the Rebbe, also not realizing, the conversations were so natural, you forgot where you were, but my chassan likes coffee. And the Rebbe said, yeah, your chassan likes coffee. And she made a whole big deal out of the fact that her chassan likes coffee, like the most important thing in the world. She had this way of making, my sister just told this to me, my chassan likes coffee. Oh, your chassan likes coffee? Interesting. It was like, so who cares? But the Rebbetzin, when she spoke to you, she was talking to you. And if for my sister at the age of 19 years old, her chassan liking coffee was important, then it was important to the Rebbetzin too. That was how she related to people. So she's sitting at this table, there's 10 or 12 men and women sitting around the table, and she's talking to each one. And Label Zions, who told me the story, Rabbi Label Zions told me that he told the Rebbetzin, my father was at your wedding. And when she heard that Simcha Zissel Zions was at her wedding, she turned to this man who was elderly, and she started to ask him to repeat what he remembered from the wedding. And it was like there was nobody else in the room. And the way he explained it to me was, the Rebbetzin was on the women's side. So she didn't see what happened on the men's side. She didn't see how her father danced, how her husband danced, how the other people danced. And the way he told me the story was, the Rebbetzin was verbrenging with this Yid who was at her wedding on the men's side. And it was every little detail of what happened at the chassan on the men's side mattered to her. And the way he told it to me was, you could see how Chassidish she was, what her father did, how her father behaved, and how her father celebrated her own wedding. She was on the other side of the mechitza. She was doing what the Kala is supposed to be doing. But what happened by the Rebbe, her father, this was almost 50 years after she was married, was so important to her. Little details, and just another little story. Anyway, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin got married about 14 months after they left Russia. And then she went into Golus. Because the Rebbe could not live next to the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe could not next to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of layers of why. Why did the Rebbe stay away from the Frierdiker Rebbe all those years in Europe? From 1927 till 1941, the Frierdiker Rebbe is living in Riga, Latvia. The lady's living in Warsaw, Poland. And then he's living in Otwock, Poland. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe of the Gunzer was living first in Berlin. And when the Nazis, Machon came to power, the Rebbe moved to Paris. Now, why was the Rebbe not with the Frierdiker Rebbe? I'm sure there's many answers, but the simplest answer was because the Rebbe did not have papers. The Rebbe did not have neutralization papers, what you would call today. The Rebbe didn't have a green card. When the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia, the Rebbe was with the Frierdiker Rebbe in Riga. And they kicked him out of the country. The Frierdiker Rebbe was given rights to stay with his family, but our Rebbe was then only engaged, who had no rights to stay in Riga. And the last thing the Rebbe wanted to do was go back to Soviet Russia. The only way for a person without citizenship to stay in a country is to be a student. Which explains B'Pashtus and B'Das Tachma why the Rebbe was in school all those years. What kept the Rebbe in Berlin was that he went to school. What kept the Rebbe in Paris that he went to school. If you've ever seen the descriptions of the Rebbe's transcripts, all his professors write that the Rebbe is a great student, but he never comes to school. He missed more than 50% of the classes. He missed almost all the lectures. But he did fine on the tests. He did very good on the tests, but he never came to school. The Rebbe was busy with his own stuff. The Rebbe's in Yonim. But b'derech hateva, the Rebbe was away from the Frierdiker Rebbe, not because he wanted to be. He's away from the Frierdiker Rebbe because this is the only way he can stay out of Russia. But there are letters. There's a letter from Achei Temimim where Achei Temimim writes to him. Saul Jacobson lived in New York, a whole thing. But the Nakuda is that he writes that the Rebbe, our Rebbe, is staying away from the Frierdiker Rebbe because he wants to learn in Daven. There was a primistic reason also. In other words, the Chitzoniistic reason, the reason that Rebbe was away from the Frierdiker Rebbe because he had no rights to stay in Latvia, no rights to stay in Poland. They needed permission. But there was apparently other reasons. The Rebbe wanted to do his own thing. The Rebbe was in his own world, together with the Rebbetzin, and they lived, their lives were so difficult. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin lived in a studio apartment for about 10 years or more. You know what a studio apartment is? Does anybody know what a studio apartment is? Where the whole apartment is one room. You walk to the apartment, that's the bedroom. There was no living room. There was no dining room. There was no dinette. There was a room. And that room had a table and chairs and a pull-out bed. They lived in one room. Now you must understand, pardon me, that Rebbetzin was a Schneerson. She grew up. The Schneersons did not live poor. The Rabbeim's Mishpachas Bechlal did not live poor. The Friedrich Rebbe, when he was not yet a Rebbe, had a lot of money. The Rebbetzin grew up very comfortably as a girl. She lived back in a small shtetl in Lubavitch, but there was no. She didn't live like a poor person. Now she's following her husband Mamish into Golos, first in Berlin and then in Paris. She's away from her family. Her Gashmiistic life was so limited. I'll tell you to what extent. The Rebbetzin got wedding gifts. The Rebbetzin got wedding gifts, physical gifts, china and other things. She had no place to keep them. Her apartment was so small, she had no place to keep the wedding gifts. So all of her wedding gifts were stored in her parents' home. But after being married 10 years, after being married for 10 years, the Rebbe took a job. That's how it looks. He took a job. I don't know what kind of job he took, but he took some kind of a job. When the Rebbe took a job and he was no longer being supported by the Friedrich Rebbe, so the Rebbetzin afforded themselves an apartment with a bedroom. The verstehst? For 10 years, they lived in one room. After being married for 10 years, again, this is how I surmise the Rebbe, when he was in school, the Friedrich Rebbe was paying the bills. The Friedrich was paying the bills, they lived on a shoestring budget. They lived very, very meager. The Rebbe got a job, because they had money, all money. So they rented an apartment with a bedroom. There was a whole chiddush that they now have a bedroom, verstehst? So when they got that bedroom, so now they had place for their wedding gifts. And there's a letter from the Friedrich Rebbe, which he writes to the Rebbe Achei Temimim, about her older sister has packed up her gifts and she's going to ship them to her, and she did it with such enthusiasm, with such Avas Yisrael, and da-da-da-da-da. Friedrich Rebbe is very complimentary of the way Chana, the older sister, sent her gifts. But she had no place for her belongings for 10 years. She lived so simply. This was a person who was not used to living that way. She followed the Rebbe wherever the Rebbe went, and the truth is, before the Rebbe was Rebbe, she lived to make the Rebbe's life easier. That's what she lived for. How do you understand that? In other words, can you appreciate the hardship, the difficulty, living all by yourself? They would go Yom Tov, they would go to the Friedrich Rebbe. They came for Pesach, they came for Tishrei, and when she was there for Yom Tov and Tishrei, so she was with her sister, she was with her mother, she was with her grandmother, she was with the family. But otherwise, she was all by herself. And when the Friedrich Rebbe lived in Poland, it seems, I can't say this for sure, but it seems, that by 1937, 38, 39 for sure, the Polish government would not let the Rebbe visit for Yom Tov. The last couple of years that the Rebbe was living in Paris, the Friedrich Rebbe used to send him matzah and wine because the Polish government would not let the Rebbe into Poland for a visit. So she couldn't see her parents' Yom Tov site. And they were by themselves. And there's so many stories of how the Rebbetzin lived. And the Rebbetzin, the Rebbetzin was a Yiddish tochter. So the meat had to be kosher in the house, the bed had to be baked in the house, everything had to be on a standard of kashrus that the Rebbe was happy with. And the Rebbetzin had to arrange that the Rebbe should have what to eat, Just a few stories about the Paris years. I don't know anything about the Berlin years. But there were two bakeries in Paris which had, I guess what you would call Pas Yisrael. And for whatever reason, the Rebbe liked one of those two bakeries and he didn't like the other bakery. When the Rebbe came to Paris, this is a different story, I'm changing the subject. The Rebbe went to a butcher, it was a kosher butcher. The Rebbe went into the butcher, he started talking to the butcher. And the Rebbe, of course, knew what questions to ask. He spoke to the butcher for a while, and then the Rebbe decided that this butcher was an Erlich Yid, you could trust him. And after the Rebbe asked all of his questions, he said to the butcher, if you'll please her, I'll eat your meat. In other words, first the Rebbe had his questions. And when the Rebbe finished his questions, he said to the butcher, my wife does the kashering, she prepares the meat. If it's kosher for her, it's kosher for me. After he asked all of his questions, he said to the butcher, if you'll please her, in other words, you pleased me. If you'll please her, I'll eat your meat. And the butcher provided them with kosher meat. The Rebbe used to go to a farm to get the Rebbe Chol of Yisrael. The Rebbe had nothing to eat in France or in Germany because the kasher was not a standard that the Rebbe liked. So the Rebbe told someone a story that there were two bakeries in Paris. And again, I don't understand this exactly, but this is the basic story. Where they served bread that was Pas Yisrael. And for some reason, the Rebbe liked one bakery over the other. So the Rebbe used to go to that bakery to buy bread. One day, the Rebbe goes to that bakery, and the owner of the other bakery got wind of the fact that the Rebbe only eats from the other bakery and doesn't eat from his bakery. And he was very jealous. I don't think it was about money. It was about dignity, about honor. How come the Rebbe doesn't trust his kashrus and he trusts the other guy's kashrus? So one day the Rebbe walked up to the bakery that he would buy bread from, and the baker of the other bakery, whom the Rebbe did not know, walked over to the Rebbe and he said cynically, "You eat from here? Like you trust the kashrus here?" That's all he said. "You eat from here?" And that was it. There was no more bread. That's all he said. And the Rebbetzin found out that it was the competitor, the other guy who came and said, "You eat from here," and the Rebbe wouldn't eat the bread. And you could tell the Rebbe 1,000 times, you don't understand, the guy who complained is the competition. That was it. So the Rebbe said, "Hat min kein bread, ich hätte nicht gehabt." How she expressed it, "Had the Eibishter geholfen, God Almighty helped, we didn't have bread either." So she had to make the bread herself. This is how the Rebbetzin lived all those years. It was good for her. She didn't need it. I don't understand it, but the Rebbetzin didn't need anything. There's a story that I saw in the Chabad magazine many years ago that they had a studio apartment, and they built a sukkah on the fire escape. You know how it is, the neighbor sues you, and you have 7 days to take it down. The famous story with the sukkah, 7 days to take it down. Anyway, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin built a sukkah on the fire escape outside their apartment in Paris. The entire sukkah had room for 2 people to sit. It was a tiny little sukkah. On Shmini Atzeres, so the way people lived in France was, if you wanted to eat in the sukkah, you'd go to the shul. Nobody built sukkahs outside their homes because there were all kind of restrictions. Most people did not make their own sukkahs. So people who wanted to eat in the sukkah would go to the shul. The shul had a big sukkah. You would carry your food. I don't know what they did on Shabbos, and you would eat in the shul sukkah. Most people didn't have their own sukkahs. But in Paris, nobody ate in the sukkah Shmini Atzeres. Eating in sukkah Shmini Atzeres is only by Chassidim. And I think that's also tricky, exactly how we do that. So there was a Yid in Paris who was an Israeli who worked for a newspaper in Israel. He was visiting Paris. He wasn't that frum, but he came from a tradition where Shmini Atzeres is supposed to sit in the sukkah. So when he came to shul, they told him that on Shmini Atzeres they're closing the sukkah. Shana Rabbah, the sukkahs are going to be closed. There's no sukkah Shmini Atzeres. So he said to people, you know where I can go eat? I come from a tradition of Chassidim that we eat in the sukkah Shmini Atzeres. Where can I find a sukkah that's open? Chaver, I need your attention. If you look out the door, we're going to close the doors and it'll be boiling hot in here. I need your attention, please. So he said to people, do you know where I can go? So I can eat the sukkah Shmini Atzeres. Yeah, there's a son-in-law of a Rebbe who lives in the Latin neighborhood of Paris. He has a sukkah on his fire escape. He's invited to his house. So he went over to the son-in-law of a Rebbe who was living in the Latin neighborhood of Paris. He says, listen, I'm not such a big tzaddik, but I come from a tradition that on Shmini Atzeres we eat in the sukkah. Can I come to your sukkah? And he said, sure. So he came to that studio apartment, and as soon as he walked into the apartment, he realized that the sukkah had 2 seats, one for the Rebbe, one for the Rebbe's. And he sat in the Rebbe's seat, so the Rebbe sat in the house. And he felt terrible. They had no children, as we know. And he was interfering with their Yom Tif. The Rebbe and the Rebbe would sit together and eat, and now she was not able to with the Rebbe because he was there. So he told the Rebbe, I'm not that religious, this is not that important to me. I hate to be the one to take you away from your wife. And the way he describes how easy the Rebbe and the Rebbe, they really made him feel at ease. In other words, the Rebbe made it so easy for him to take the favor from her. She was so generous in telling her, it's okay. He went back to Israel, and then in 1935 he wrote an article, a newspaper article. And the article finishes with, he describes the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin without their names, about their exchange and their time they spent together. And he writes, to be the son-in-law of a Rebbe in a courtyard of a Rebbe is not a trick. But to be the son-in-law of a Rebbe in the Latin neighborhood of Paris, and you're the same son-in-law of a Rebbe no matter where you are,